Marcus Webb drove the butt of his gun into the old man's shoulder before the door had finished swinging shut. The old man was 66 years old. He was sitting in a plastic chair by the window, reading a newspaper. He didn't drop it. He didn't flinch back. He just went very still, the way something goes still when it has already decided. Her name was Dana Rourke, 38 years old. She owned this pharmacy. Her father had owned it before her. She had opened the door herself at 7 that morning, the same way she had every Monday for 9 years. She was behind the counter when Marcus pressed the barrel against the back of her neck and told her to open the storage room. Her hands went to the counter for balance. 3 fingers, 3 taps, even, deliberate. Marcus didn't hear it. He was already moving. Across the room, Frank Briggs set his newspaper down. Very slowly, both hands flat, like a man with nowhere to be and nothing to prove. And that was exactly what made it the most dangerous thing anyone in that room had ever seen. What happened next? Nobody who was there has ever described it the same way twice. This is Heart Tales. Let's go back to that Monday morning and find out exactly how it happened. The front door had not fully closed when Marcus Webb turned to the 2 men behind him and said one word. Storage. Cole went left, toward the dispensing counter. Denny moved straight, past the blood pressure machine bolted to the wall, past the rack of reading glasses, past the basket of hand sanitizer bottles by the register. Both of them knew where they were going. They had been here before, in the planning. Not this pharmacy specifically, but a pharmacy, a Monday morning, a woman opening alone. Marcus stayed with Dana. He kept the gun at her side, below the level of the front windows. The street outside was empty. 7:14 in the morning. Pikeville, Kentucky, on a day that had begun like every other day. Quiet, cold, the kind of pale gray light that made everything look temporary. Dana's hands were on the counter. She was thinking about the phone mounted to the wall behind her, 6 steps away, and the number 9, and whether she could cross that distance before he could cross the space between them. She calculated it in the time it took to breathe in once. No, she could not. She was thinking about the panic button under the register lip, a small red switch her father had installed 11 years ago, wired to nothing now because the monitoring company had folded and she hadn't replaced the contract and she had kept meaning to. The switch was there. The wire went nowhere. She was thinking about the old man in the chair by the window. She was trying not to look at him. "Open the back," Marcus said. His voice was even, professionally even, the kind of evenness that comes from practice. He had done this before. His body knew how to stand in a pharmacy at gunpoint, knew how much space to hold between himself and the person he was controlling, knew exactly how to angle himself so that anyone passing on the street outside would see only 2 people at a counter having an ordinary conversation. Dana moved toward the storage room door. The lock required a key from her ring, and her hands were steady enough to find it. She had always been steady under pressure. It was something people had remarked on since she was a child. "Your hands don't shake, Dana. How do your hands not shake?" But her teeth were pressing together hard enough that she could feel it in her jaw. She found the key. She was 3 steps from the door when she passed the counter edge, and her right hand trailed along the laminate surface, the way it always did, an old habit, the way she always steadied herself walking this particular stretch. Her fingers found the edge. She did not look at the old man. 3 fingers down, 3 taps, even. The same rhythm she had practiced in the back room on a slow Tuesday afternoon 8 months ago. The same rhythm she had thought she would never actually need. The same rhythm that a 66-year-old man in a plastic chair by the window had taught her with his knuckle against the counter surface while his coffee went cold. 1. Cole's voice from the back. Doors locked. 2. Marcus shifted his weight, half turning toward the storage room. 3. She unlocked the door. She went through it. The gun stayed on her. Behind her, in the chair by the window, Frank Briggs did not look up from his newspaper for another 4 seconds. Then he set it down. Both hands flat on his knees. Not fast, not slow. The way a man sets something down when he has decided he is finished with it and will not be needing it again. He sat like that for a moment, perfectly still, perfectly quiet. the kind of stillness that has nothing in it of fear. His eyes moved to Marcus Webb's back. His eyes moved to the storage room door. His eyes moved to the rope of zip ties Cole had pulled from his jacket pocket and set on the counter while he waited for Dana to open the safe. Frank Briggs had not been in a situation like this in 11 years. His knees were not what they had been. The shoulder Marcus had hit was already tightening. He could feel it in the socket, a deep familiar ache that he had earned in a different life, in a different decade, in a room in a different state. He noted the ache. He noted Cole, 20 feet, back turned, focused on the safe. He noted Denny, standing between Frank and the front door, watching the street, hand in his jacket pocket. He noted Marcus, inside the storage room doorway now, back mostly to Frank, attention on Dana. 3 men, one of them watching the wrong direction, one of them confident the old man in the chair was no longer a variable worth tracking. They had tied his wrists with the zip ties 8 minutes later. It had taken Frank 9 seconds to get free. They had not known that. They had not known a number of things about the man in the chair by the window, and by the time they understood what they had missed, the situation had already become something none of them had planned for. But that comes later. Stay with me, because what happened inside that storage room in the next 4 minutes is the part that changes everything. And to understand why Frank Briggs was the worst possible man to have sitting in that chair on that particular Monday morning, we have to go back further than 8 months. We have to go back to what Frank Briggs had been, before Pikeville, before the blood pressure prescription, before the plastic chair and the newspaper and the quiet life nobody in that town knew to look past. Pikeville, Kentucky sits in a valley so narrow that the mountains on either side block the morning sun until nearly 9 o'clock. The town has one main street, 2 traffic lights, a diner that has been under the same family ownership for 43 years, and a pharmacy that has been under the same family ownership for 31. Rourke's Compounding Pharmacy occupied a corner lot on Maple Street, between a hardware store and an insurance office that had been vacant for 2 years. The sign above the door was the original sign, forest green letters on white, the paint touched up by Dana's father every spring until the spring he couldn't anymore, and then touched up by Dana every spring after that, with the same brush he had used, which she kept in the cabinet under the register because throwing it away had never felt like an option. Her father, Thomas Rourke, had opened the pharmacy in 1991. He had been a pharmacist for 12 years before that, working a chain store 40 minutes away, driving the same road every morning in the dark. When he finally opened his own place, he told Dana's mother that he wanted to know the people he was filling prescriptions for. He wanted to know their names. He wanted to know when something wasn't right. That was the pharmacy Dana had grown up inside. Saturday mornings on a stool behind the counter, watching her father talk to people the way doctors rarely did. Unhurried, specific, remembering things from the last visit and asking about them. He knew which customers were managing diabetes on a fixed income and quietly adjusted what he could. He knew which elderly men would not ask for help carrying their bags to the car and walk them out anyway. Dana had not planned to take over the pharmacy. She had planned to go to Lexington, to work in hospital pharmacology, to build something different. She had gotten as far as the first year of her residency when her father had his first stroke. By the time she came home, she had understood, not as a decision exactly, more as a recognition, that this was where she was needed. That had been 9 years ago. She was 38 now. She drove a truck that needed new brake pads. She kept a list of customers who were behind on payments, and another list of customers whose prescriptions she quietly carried until things improved, and the 2 lists were not always different lists. She opened at 7 and closed at 6, Monday through Saturday, and on Sunday mornings, she went to her father's grave in the cemetery on the hill above town, and sat there for 20 minutes in the way she had found, over time, was enough. The pharmacy was not doing badly. It was not doing easily either. The opioid crisis had changed the landscape of small-town pharmacy work in ways that were difficult to explain to people who had not lived inside it. The additional regulations, the mandatory tracking systems, the customers who came in with legitimate prescriptions, and the ones who came in with something that looked like a legitimate prescription, and the daily work of telling the difference. Dana had become good at that work. She had also become tired of it. in the specific way you become tired of doing something necessary that nobody thanks you for. She had one part-time employee, a woman named Patrice, who worked Tuesday and Thursday afternoons and Saturdays, and who had worked for Thomas Rourke before that, and who sometimes still called Dana Tom's girl, without appearing to notice she was doing it. Dana did not correct her. Mondays she opened alone. She had been doing it for 9 years, and she had never thought of it as a vulnerability. Pikeville was a small town. She knew almost everyone who walked through her door. The ones she didn't know, she learned quickly. There was an older woman named Ruth Calloway who came in every second Thursday for a thyroid prescription and always brought a cutting from her garden, a sprig of rosemary in summer, dried lavender in winter, and set it on the counter without explanation, the way some people leave a tip. There was a man named Dennis Prater, early 40s, who picked up his wife's blood pressure medication every month and always asked after Dana's truck, which he had once fixed for free in his driveway on a Saturday afternoon, because he had seen her pulled over on the county road, and she had looked tired. These were the people of this pharmacy, not customers exactly, something closer than that. She had not known Frank Briggs when he first walked in 14 months ago. He had come in on a Monday, the first Monday, she remembered, because she had been reorganizing the blood pressure medications when the door opened, and she had looked up expecting someone she recognized. She had not recognized him. Tall, broad through the shoulders in the way of a man who had been larger once, and carried the memory of it in his frame. 64 years old, she would learn later. Gray hair cut short, a leather vest over a flannel shirt. The vest had a patch on the back, large, clearly visible from across the room. A death's head insignia at the center, Hell's Angels in a top rocker, Harlan County curved below it. He had walked to the counter and set down a prescription slip and said, with the economy of a man who did not explain himself unless necessary, that he had just moved to town. She had filled the prescription. Metoprolol succinate, 50 milligrams, for blood pressure. He had paid in cash. He had thanked her with a nod and left. He came back the following Monday, and the Monday after that. After 6 weeks, she had started setting his prescription aside on Friday afternoons, so it would be ready when he came in. He had noticed. She could tell by the slight change in how he stood at the counter, a fractional ease, but he had not said anything about it. After 4 months, she knew his name, his medication, the fact that he took his coffee black from the machine in the corner and always brought exact change, and almost nothing else about him. He sat in the same chair every visit, by the window, with whatever newspaper he had picked up from the stand outside. He stayed until his prescription was ready, which sometimes took 15 minutes, and sometimes took longer, depending on what else was happening. He never appeared to mind the wait. The people of Pikeville, over those 14 months, had arrived at a comfortable collective understanding about Frank Briggs. He was an old biker, he was quiet, he paid his bills, he kept to himself. Nobody looked at him for long, nobody asked him much. There was, in the way he occupied a room, something that made extended curiosity feel inadvisable without quite knowing why. He had lived in the small house on Cutter Road for 14 months, and Dana was fairly certain she was the person in Pikeville who knew him best, and she knew almost nothing. What she did not know, what no one in Pikeville knew, was that Frank Briggs had spent 22 years as president of the Harlan County chapter of the Hells Angels. That in those 22 years he had navigated disputes that lesser men had not survived navigating. That the quiet he carried was not the quiet of a man who had never known violence, but the quiet of a man who had been inside enough of it to understand that the ones who lasted were the ones who knew when not to move. He had retired from the presidency 4 years ago, handed the patch to his road captain on a Wednesday afternoon in October, shaken the man's hand, gotten on his bike, and ridden west until he crossed the county line. He had not looked back. The blood pressure medication was real. The newspaper was real. The quiet life on Cutter Road was something he was building from scratch, one Monday morning at a time. Nobody in Pikeville had thought to ask what he had been before he arrived. That, it would turn out, was the most important thing about him. 3 weeks before the Monday that Marcus Webb walked through her door, a green Dodge pickup had driven slowly down Maple Street at 11:45 in the morning and stopped across from the pharmacy for 4 minutes before driving on. Dana had not seen it. She had been in the back, reconciling inventory. Patrice had seen it, but had thought nothing of it. Someone reading a text, someone lost. Nothing unusual about a truck pausing on a street. The pickup had come back 2 days later, at 7:20 in the morning, and sat for 6 minutes. The driver had a clear line of sight to the pharmacy interior through the front window. He could see Dana at the counter. He could see that she was alone. He could see the layout, the register, the dispensing area, the door to the back. He had driven this kind of route before, in other towns, outside other pharmacies. He was good at it, efficient. Marcus Webb was 29 years old, and had been doing this since he was 22. He had a system: scout on a Tuesday, confirm on a Thursday, move on a Monday when staff was thinnest and the morning street was quiet. He had robbed 11 pharmacies across 4 states. He had never been caught. He had never fired the gun. He had never needed to. He understood small-town pharmacies the way a tradesman understands a work site. The sight lines, the timing, the specific vulnerabilities of a business run by one person who trusted the community she served. That trust was the thing he relied on. People in small towns did not expect this. Their defenses were built for different problems. What Marcus Webb had not done, on either of his scouting visits, was arrive early enough to see the old man come in. Frank Briggs always arrived at 7. He was always in his chair before 7:15. By 7:20, when Marcus had run his second pass, Frank was already seated with his newspaper, and Marcus's angle of view, across the street, from a moving vehicle, had shown him the front third of the pharmacy interior. The chair was in the far left corner, out of that sight line. Marcus had seen a woman alone in a pharmacy. He had made his plan accordingly. What you don't account for is what you never see. And Frank Briggs, for 14 months, had been exactly the kind of man that nobody in Pikeville had looked at twice. 8 months before Marcus Webb drove slowly down Maple Street for the first time, a man had walked into Rourke's compounding pharmacy at 7:40 in the morning, with a cut above his left eyebrow and a story he did not offer, and Dana did not ask for. It had been a Tuesday. Patrice wasn't in until noon. Dana had been alone. The man was not Frank. He was someone Dana had never seen before. Mid-30s, work boots, a jacket with a company logo she didn't recognize. He had sat in the chair closest to the door and pressed a folded paper towel against his forehead and asked, quietly, if she had anything for the bleeding. She had come around the counter with gauze and antiseptic. While she worked, she had noticed the way he sat, back to the wall, eyes on the door, the specific vigilance of someone who had learned to track exits. She had seen it before, in certain customers. She had learned not to name it out loud. She had cleaned the cut. She had given him the gauze and a cold pack and a bottle of water from the mini refrigerator she kept behind the counter for customers who needed to take medication on the spot. He had thanked her. He had paid for nothing because she had not offered him a price. He had left. 20 minutes later, Frank Briggs had walked in for his Monday prescription. 1 day late that week, she remembered, because he had mentioned something about a road trip and had stopped just inside the door. He had looked at the paper towel on the counter, the bloodied one she hadn't yet thrown away. He had looked at her. "You all right?" he said. It was, she would realize later, the most words he had said to her in 4 months of Monday visits. She had told him about the man with the cut. Not because she was concerned, she wasn't, particularly, but because Frank was asking and she was, she realized as she was talking, more unsettled than she had understood. Something about the man's eyes on the door, something about the way he had sat. Frank had listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He picked up his prescription bag from the counter and turned it in his hands once, the way he sometimes did when he was thinking something through. Then he set it back down. "Can I show you something?" he said. She had said yes, mostly because the question was so unexpected from him that she couldn't think of a reason to say no. He had come around the counter, the first time he had ever been on her side of it, and stood beside her at the dispensing surface. He had raised his right hand and placed 3 fingers flat against the laminate. 3 taps, he said. Even spacing, not fast. He demonstrated. His knuckle against the counter. 1, 2, 3. The sound was quiet, contained. The kind of sound that would not carry more than 10 feet in a room with ambient noise. A television, a fan, the ordinary shuffle of people moving around. "Anyone watching you won't hear it," he said. Anyone who knows what it means will. She had looked at his hand on the counter, then at him. Morse, she said. Close enough. He straightened. It's a distress pattern. 3 beats even. Not the SOS rhythm. Simpler than that. 3 beats means I need help and I cannot say so. She had asked him where it came from. He had been quiet for a moment in the way she had come to understand meant he was deciding how much to say. We used it, he said finally. Inside. When something was wrong and you couldn't speak to it directly. Could be a room you walked into and the temperature was off. Could be someone at a table you didn't recognize. Could be anything. 3 beats on whatever surface was close. He paused. The people who needed to hear it, heard it. She understood, from the way he said we, that he did not mean a small group. She understood, from the way he said inside, that he did not mean a building. She did not ask him to clarify. You think I need to know this, she said. He looked at the front window, at the street outside, empty and ordinary in the 8 o'clock morning light. You open alone, he said, on a corner, with a controlled substance inventory in the back. He picked up his prescription bag. I think it costs you nothing to know it. She had practiced it that afternoon, when Patrice had gone home and the pharmacy was empty. She had stood at the counter and tapped her fingers against the surface. 1, 2, 3, and felt, as she did it, slightly foolish. The pharmacy was quiet. The street outside was quiet. Pikeville was a town where she knew almost everyone by name. She had practiced it anyway. 3 times that afternoon. Then she had locked up and gone home and made dinner and not thought about it again until the morning 8 months later when Marcus Webb pressed a gun barrel against the back of her neck and told her to open the storage room. She had thought about it then. She had thought about it with complete clarity. The way you think about something your body already knows how to do, not remembering it so much as finding it, already there, already ready, like a key you had forgotten you were carrying. She had not looked at Frank when she tapped. She had not needed to. The only question, the one she carried with her through the storage room door and every second that followed, was whether he was still in the chair, whether Marcus had left him conscious, whether 9 seconds was enough time for a 66-year-old man with a hit shoulder and a blood pressure prescription to change the mathematics of what was about to happen inside her pharmacy. She did not know the answer to that question. What she knew was this: she had done her part. The rest was up to Frank. The Sunday before it happened, Marcus Webb sat in a motel room on the edge of Pikeville and ate a sandwich he had bought from a gas station and went over the plan one more time. He did this before every job. Not because he was anxious. Anxiety was something he had trained out of himself years ago, the way you train out a flinch. But because the review was part of the system. The system was what kept him clean across 11 pharmacies in 4 states. You did not vary from the system. You did not improvise. You identified the variables, you controlled the ones you could, and you accepted the ones you couldn't and planned around them. Variable 1, the layout. He had it. Corner lot, front window facing Maple Street, dispensing counter running left to right, storage room at the rear left, single entry point from the street, no visible cameras above the counter, one mounted above the front door angled toward the register. Variable 2, staff, 1 woman, opening alone on Mondays. He had confirmed this across 3 separate Monday morning passes over 6 weeks. She arrived at 6:52, 6:58, and 6:49. She unlocked the front door, disabled the alarm, turned on the lights. She was always alone until at least 9. Variable 3, the safe. Compounding pharmacies kept controlled substances in a locked storage room with a secondary safe inside. He had done 2 of these before. The pharmacist always knew the combination. They always gave it. The gun made the conversation short. Variable 4, exit. Cole would bring the truck to the side alley at 7:30. In and out in under 12 minutes. Back roads to the interstate. Clean. He had gone through all 4 variables. He had eaten the rest of his sandwich. He had not accounted for a variable he had never seen because it arrived before he did, and sat in a corner and read a newspaper and looked, to anyone passing by, like exactly nothing. He turned off the light at 10:30. He slept without difficulty. That was the thing about Marcus Webb. He slept well before jobs. He had always taken that as confirmation that what he was doing was reasonable, that it fit inside some private logic he had built for himself over 7 years, a logic in which pharmacies were institutions rather than people, inventory was inventory, and the woman behind the counter was a variable rather than a person with a father's brush under her register and a list of customers she carried when things got hard. He had not thought about her beyond what he needed to know. He was good at that, too. Dana had spent that same Sunday evening doing inventory. It was something she did on the last Sunday of every month, a full count of controlled substance stock against the DEA logbook, cross-referenced with the dispensing records. It took 3 hours and she had never once found a discrepancy, but the process itself was non-negotiable. Her father had taught her that. You count what matters. You count it carefully. You count it even when you are certain of the number, because certainty without verification is just confidence, and confidence gets people hurt. She had finished at 8:45. She had locked the storage room, set the alarm, and driven home. She had made tea. She had sat at her kitchen table for a while without doing anything in particular, which was something she rarely allowed herself and which she had recently, under instruction from her doctor, been trying to do more of. Just sit. Just be somewhere without a task attached to it. Her mind had gone, as it sometimes did on Sunday evenings, to her father. Not sadly, just to him, the specific texture of him, the way he had stood at the dispensing counter with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, the way he had known every customer's name and one personal fact about them that had nothing to do with their prescription. He had believed that knowing people was the work. The pharmacy was just the location. She thought she understood that better now than she had at 29. She had washed her cup. She had gone to bed. She had slept reasonably well, which was more than she usually managed on Sunday nights. Monday morning. She pulled into the lot behind the pharmacy at 6:47. The sky was the color of old aluminum, flat and cold, the kind of February morning that doesn't brighten so much as gradually become less dark. Her breath made a cloud when she got out of the truck. She unlocked the back door, switched the alarm off. The panel beeped twice, the way it always did. A sound she had heard so many times it had become indistinguishable from silence. She turned on the dispensing room lights. She started the coffee machine. She went through the front and unlocked the street door and turned the sign from closed to open and stood for a moment, looking at Maple Street, empty and still in the early morning, the hardware store dark across the way, the street light at the corner still on against the pale sky. Nothing moved. She went back to the counter. At 7:04, Frank Briggs pushed open the front door. He was wearing what he always wore in February: flannel shirt, the leather vest over it, the Harlan County patch large and clear across his back, the death's head at the center. He was carrying the newspaper he had picked up from the stand outside. He nodded at her the way he always did, a single downward motion that served as greeting and acknowledgement simultaneously, and moved to his chair by the window. She had his prescription ready. She had pulled it Friday afternoon, the way she always did. "Usual," she said, setting it on the counter. He came up, paid in cash, exact change, the way he always did, and took the bag back to his chair. He sat. He opened the newspaper. He set the bag beside the leg of the chair. The pharmacy settled into its Monday morning quiet. She was at the dispensing counter, working through the week's preparation list, when the door opened again at 7:11. She looked up. 3 men. The one in front was young, late 20s, she thought, lean in the way of someone who moved carefully, rather than someone who moved fast. Dark jacket. His right hand was in his jacket pocket before the door had finished opening, and Dana had enough time to register that specific detail. Hand already in pocket, already decided, before her body understood what her mind was still catching up to. The other 2 spread left and right inside the doorway. It happened fast. It happened the way things happen when someone has practiced them, without hesitation, without noise, without any of the markers that give you time to react. The young man was at the counter before she had moved. His hand came out of his pocket. "Don't," he said. "One word. Quiet. The way you say it to someone you are confident will listen." She listened. He told her what he wanted. Storage room, safe, controlled substances only. Nobody gets hurt. Standard speech. The words of a man who had said them before in other rooms, to other women standing behind other counters. She nodded. She moved toward the storage room. And here is what Marcus Webb did not know, and could not have known, because he had been watching the counter and the register and the door to the back, the things that mattered to his plan. He did not know that Frank Briggs had set his newspaper down. He did not know that Frank had been watching Marcus from the moment the door opened, the way a man watches something he recognized before he consciously identified it. The hand in the pocket, the spread of the other two, the practiced quiet of it. He did not know that Frank's eyes had gone to Dana. And Dana, walking the length of the dispensing counter toward the storage room door, Marcus 2 steps behind her with the gun at her side, let her right hand trail along the counter edge, the way it always did on this walk, the old habit, the steadying gesture. Except this time her fingers were not steadying. They were counting. She placed 3 fingers flat against the laminate surface, and she tapped. Not fast, not slow, even spacing, the way Frank had shown her 8 months ago on a Tuesday morning, when she had thought she would never need it. The way she had practiced 3 times alone in an empty pharmacy, and then set aside and almost forgotten. 1. Marcus said something to Cole behind her. She didn't catch the words. Her hearing had narrowed to a tunnel. 2. Her fingers pressed harder against the laminate. Not because she meant to, because she needed him to hear it through whatever noise was in the room, through the blood in her ears, through the 11 years of Monday mornings that had never been anything except ordinary. 3. She reached the storage room door. She found her key. In the chair by the window, Frank Briggs did not move for 3 full seconds. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his vest. He took out his phone. He looked at it for a moment, not at the screen, at the phone itself, the way you look at something when you are making a decision that doesn't require the object, but your hands need somewhere to be while you make it. He typed 4 words. He sent them. He put the phone back in his vest pocket. He looked at Denny, standing between him and the front door. He looked at Cole, moving toward the storage room. He looked at Marcus Webb's back. Then Frank Briggs stood up from the chair, slowly, because his knee required it, and because there was no reason to hurry, and because a man who has done the thing he has done does not need to announce himself with speed. He stood up. And the room, without anyone in it yet understanding why, changed. Denny was 23 years old, and had been doing this for 8 months, and in those 8 months had learned one reliable thing about the people they encountered. Nobody in a pharmacy fought back. The old ones froze. The young ones complied. The ones in between did the calculation fast. Gun, 3 men, no backup, and made the sensible choice. It was, Marcus had explained to him early on, a question of math. You presented the math clearly, and people solved it correctly. Denny was thinking about this, standing between the old man's chair and the front door, watching the street outside, when he heard the chair creak behind him. He turned. The old man was standing. Not fast, not with any particular urgency. He was rising the way a man rises when his knee requires negotiation. One hand briefly on the chair arm, a slight forward lean to get the weight distributed correctly, then upright. He was tall. Denny had not registered how tall when the man was sitting. He was registering it now. "Hey," Denny said. "Stay down." The old man looked at him. Not at the gun Denny was pulling from his jacket. At him, at his face. The specific unhurried attention of someone who was gathering information rather than reacting to it. "I said stay down." The old man took 1 step toward him. Denny raised the gun. What happened in the next 4 seconds, Denny would later struggle to describe with any precision. Not because it was complicated, but because it was faster than his ability to process it sequentially. The old man's left hand moved to the left. Denny's eyes tracked it by instinct. And in the half-second that his attention followed, the right hand came across in a motion so economical it barely looked like a motion at all. The gun was on the floor. Denny's wrist was in the old man's right hand, bent at an angle that made movement in any direction a problem. The old man looked at him with the same expression he'd had reading the newspaper. "Floor," he said. Denny went to the floor. The old man picked up the gun. He checked it the way someone checks a thing they have handled 10,000 times. magazine, chamber, safety, in under 3 seconds, without looking away from the room. He put it in the back of his waistband. He moved toward the dispensing counter. Cole heard nothing from the front of the pharmacy. He was focused on the storage room, specifically on the safe inside it, a gray steel unit bolted to the floor in the left corner, and on the pharmacist who was opening it with the combination Marcus had told her to provide. She was doing it without resistance, which was how it always went. Cole had been on 4 of these jobs. The pharmacist always opened the safe. You just had to stand close enough that they understood the alternative. He was watching her hands on the dial when he heard Marcus say something sharp behind him. He turned. The old man was standing in the storage room doorway. Not Marcus. The old man from the chair. Vest, gray hair, the patch across his back catching the storage room light as he stepped through the door. He was holding Denny's gun at his side, not raised, pointed at nothing in particular, which was somehow worse than if it had been pointed directly at Cole. Marcus was 2 steps back, against the shelving unit. His gun was up. "Don't," Marcus said. The old man stopped moving. He stood in the doorway and looked at Marcus, and then at Cole, and then at Dana, who had turned from the safe and was standing very still with her back to the corner. "Step away from her," the old man said to Cole. His voice was the same as it had been at the counter every Monday for 14 months, even, unhurried. The voice of a man describing something that had already happened, rather than something he was demanding. Cole looked at Marcus. Marcus's jaw was tight. He was doing the calculation. The old man had Denny's gun. Marcus still had his own. Cole was between them and the pharmacist. The door was behind the old man. There were still options here. The math had not completely collapsed. "Put it down," Marcus said to the old man. "Put it down and step back, and this is still a thing we all walk away from." The old man said nothing. He looked at Marcus the way he had looked at Denny, that same gathering attention, steady and impersonal, the look of someone reading a room rather than responding to it. His eyes moved to Marcus's gun hand, to his feet, to the distance between them. Then he looked at Cole. "I'm not going to say it again," he said. Cole's hand moved toward his jacket pocket, a reflex, 4 jobs of muscle memory, and stopped. Something in the old man's stillness made the motion feel like a mistake before it was finished. Cole had done this 4 times. He knew how these rooms worked. He knew the variables. But the variable standing in that doorway was not reading the room the way anyone in it expected. And that specific wrongness, the complete absence of performance, of threat being assembled for effect, landed in Cole's chest like a change in air pressure. He stepped sideways, away from Dana, away from the pocket. Marcus saw it and his jaw tightened further. "Who are you?" Marcus said. The old man didn't answer. "I asked you a question." "I know," the old man said. The silence in the storage room was the specific silence of a small enclosed space with 4 people in it, 2 guns, and a situation that had moved well outside the plan Marcus had reviewed in a motel room the night before. The shelving units on either side held amber pill bottles in ordered rows. The safe was still open behind Dana. The fluorescent light above them buzzed at a frequency just below hearing. Marcus was thinking fast. Cole was not moving. The old man was standing in the only exit. "You know what this is," Marcus said. "You know how this works. You're not police. You're not going to—" "Step away from the safe," the old man said, to Cole. Cole stepped away from the safe. Marcus's eyes moved to Cole with something that was almost disbelief. Not at Cole, at the situation, at the specific and inexplicable way the room had reorganized itself around this old man standing in the doorway who had not raised his voice once. "You're going to get somebody hurt," Marcus said. The professionally even voice had developed an edge now, not loud, but present. "You understand that? You're going to make this into something it doesn't need to be." The old man looked at him for a moment. "Give me the gun," he said. "I will shoot you. I know you think that." 4 words, quiet as everything else he had said, and something in them, the absence of doubt, the complete lack of performance, made Marcus Webb, who had robbed 11 pharmacies and slept well the night before every single one of them, feel for the first time in 7 years that the math had stopped working in his favor. His eyes went to the patch on the old man's vest. He had not looked at it carefully before. He looked at it now, the death's head at the center, the top rocker, the bottom rocker. He read what it said. He read it again. The gun in his hand felt, suddenly, like a different object than it had been 30 seconds ago. "Dana," the old man said, without taking his eyes off Marcus. "Doors clear. Go through and out the back." Dana did not move for a half second. She was looking at Frank, at the side of his face, the total stillness of him, and something moved through her that was not quite relief, and not quite fear, but had elements of both, and something else underneath that she didn't have a name for yet. Then she moved. She went past Cole, who did not move to stop her. She went past the old man in the doorway, close enough that she could see the tension in his shoulder, the one Marcus had hit with the gun butt, the one he had not mentioned and would not mention. And then she was through the door and into the dispensing room, and moving toward the back exit. She pushed through the back door into the cold morning air. She stood in the alley behind the pharmacy, and her legs went uncertain under her for the first time since the 3 men had walked through the front door. She put her hand against the brick wall. She breathed. Maple Street was quiet on the other side of the building. Then it wasn't. She heard it before she saw it, a sound that came up from somewhere south of town and grew without hurrying, the way a sound grows when there are enough sources of it that the individual components have stopped being separable. Low, continuous, the specific register of large engines running at a pace that is not urgent, because urgency is for people who are not certain of the outcome. She stepped out of the alley to the side of the building. Maple Street. She counted 7 motorcycles before she stopped counting. They came from the south end of the street, and they filled the road without rushing. Not a formation exactly, more like a tide. The kind of movement that doesn't require coordination because everyone involved already knows where they're going and what they're there for. They pulled up in front of the pharmacy and stopped, and the engines cut one by one until the street was quiet again in a completely different way than it had been quiet before. 8 men got off 8 motorcycles. They did not come inside. They stood on the sidewalk in front of Rourke's compounding pharmacy on Maple Street in Pikeville, Kentucky, at 7:31 on a Monday morning, and they waited with the particular patience of men who have learned that waiting, done correctly, is its own form of pressure. Inside the storage room, Marcus Webb heard the engines. He heard them cut. He heard the silence that followed. His eyes did not leave the old man in the doorway, but something had changed in them, a recalculation happening in real time, the variables shifting faster than his system could process them. "Last time," the old man said. Marcus Webb looked at the patch on the old man's vest. He looked at the gun in his own hand. He looked at the door behind Frank Briggs, and through it, at the dispensing room, and through the front window beyond that, at the shapes of 8 men standing on the sidewalk in the February morning, not moving, not speaking, not doing anything at all except being there in a way that made the walls of the room feel closer than they had been a minute ago. His hand came down. The gun touched the floor. He let go of it. Frank Briggs looked at him for a moment longer. The same expression he'd had the entire time. The same gathering attention, complete and impersonal. Then he looked at Cole. "Hands," he said. Cole put his hands up. Frank reached into the side pocket of his vest and produced 2 zip ties. He set them on the shelf beside him. "Both of you," he said. "Hands behind your backs. Sit down against the wall." They sat. Frank zip-tied Cole's wrists, then Marcus's. He did it without particular roughness and without particular gentleness, with the efficiency of someone performing a task they have performed before and see no reason to dramatize. When he was done, he straightened up and looked at Marcus Webb for the last time. Marcus was sitting on the floor of the storage room he had planned to empty in under 12 minutes. His wrists were bound behind him. 8 Hell's Angels were standing on the sidewalk outside. Denny was on the floor of the dispensing room. The plan, the system, the 7 years of careful math, all of it had arrived here, at this specific floor, in this specific town, because of a variable he had not seen from a moving vehicle on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks ago. "There are people outside," Frank said. "When the police come, and they are coming, you're going to stay exactly where you are." He picked up Marcus's gun from the floor. He walked out of the storage room. He pulled the door shut behind him. The first police cruiser came from the north end of Maple Street. Lights going, no siren. The specific choice of an officer who knows the situation is contained and sees no reason to announce himself to the whole town before he understands what he's walking into. Deputy Sheriff Carl Hutchins had been with the Pike County Sheriff's Office for 19 years. He had responded to 2 pharmacy robberies in that time, both of them after the fact. Both of them after the fact. Both of them after the fact. And open safes and pharmacists sitting in chairs with their hands shaking around cups of coffee someone had brought them. He had never responded to one in progress. The call had come in at 7:29. Anonymous. Male voice. Older. Unhurried. 4 words. 3 men. Rourke's Pharmacy. The dispatcher had asked for a name and gotten silence and then a disconnected line. She had sent Hutchins anyway because 4 words from a calm voice about an ongoing robbery were 4 more words than most people managed. He pulled up to find 8 motorcycles parked in front of the pharmacy and 8 men standing on the sidewalk who did not appear to be going anywhere or doing anything except being present in a way that made the sidewalk feel significantly smaller than its actual dimensions. He got out of the cruiser. The men on the sidewalk looked at him without expression. One of them, heavy-set, gray beard, a road captain patch on his vest, lifted his chin toward the pharmacy door. 3 inside, he said. Secured. Pharmacist is around back. Hutchins looked at the man. He looked at the pharmacy door. He looked at the 8 motorcycles. He keyed his radio and called for backup and went inside. Dana was sitting on the back step when the second cruiser pulled into the alley. She had not gone back inside. She had not called anyone. She had sat on the concrete step with her back against the door frame and her hands loose in her lap and breathed the cold February air and let her body do what it needed to do, which turned out to be nothing dramatic. No shaking, no tears, just a long, gradual loosening of something that had been pulled very tight since 7-Eleven that morning. A female deputy named Reyes crouched beside her and asked if she was hurt. Dana said she was not. Reyes asked what had happened, and Dana told her, in the specific sequential way she told things when she was being precise. 3 men, 7-Eleven, gun at the counter, storage room, the safe, and then Frank. Reyes wrote it down. When Dana got to the part about the taps on the counter, Reyes looked up from her notepad. You tapped the counter, she said. 3 times, Dana said. Even spacing. And he heard it. He heard it. Reyes looked at her for a moment. Then she wrote it down. Inside the pharmacy, Carl Hutchins found Denny on the floor of the dispensing room, zip-tied and sitting against the base of the counter with the expression of someone who has recently revised several assumptions about how the morning was going to go. In the storage room, he found Cole and Marcus in the same condition, sitting against the wall beneath the shelving unit, 3 guns on the top shelf above them, lined up with the same care someone might use arranging medication bottles. Muzzles pointed at the wall, safeties on. Hutchins stood in the doorway of the storage room and looked at the 2 men on the floor, and the 3 guns on the shelf, and the open safe in the corner, its contents untouched, and he was quiet for a moment in the way of a man assembling a picture from parts that don't quite fit the frame he brought with him. Who did this? He said. Marcus Webb said nothing. Cole said nothing. Hutchins looked at the zip ties on their wrists. Standard hardware store zip ties, white, applied with functional efficiency, not tight enough to cut circulation, tight enough that neither man had made any progress on them in the time they'd been sitting there. He looked at the 3 guns on the shelf. He looked at Marcus Webb's face. Marcus Webb was 29 years old and had robbed 11 pharmacies in 4 states and had never been caught and had believed, in the specific way of someone whose system has never failed them, that he would not be caught. He was sitting on the floor of a storage room in Pikeville, Kentucky, with his wrists zip-tied behind him, and the expression on his face was not anger, and it was not fear. It was the expression of a man performing, for the first time, an honest accounting of something he had been avoiding for 7 years. He had looked at the patch on the old man's vest. He had put the gun down. He had made that choice, not because he was forced to, not because the gun was taken from him, but because he had read the room in the moment it finally became readable and understood that the variable he had missed was not a variable at all. It was a fact. a fixed and immovable fact that had been sitting in a chair by the window every Monday morning for 14 months, reading a newspaper, waiting for a blood pressure prescription, and he had driven past it in a green Dodge pickup twice without seeing it. That was the accounting he was performing on the floor of the storage room. He did not share it with Deputy Hutchins, but it was there in his face, and Hutchins, who had been reading faces for 19 years, saw it clearly enough. By 8:15, Maple Street had 3 cruisers, a forensics van, and a small gathering of people on the opposite sidewalk who had arrived with the specific energy of a town that has received unusual news and wants to verify it with its own eyes. Patrice had arrived at 8:09. She worked Tuesdays, not Mondays, but she had heard the radio traffic on the scanner she kept in her kitchen and had driven directly to Maple Street without changing out of her house shoes. She was standing beside Dana near the back of the second cruiser, one hand on Dana's arm, not speaking, which was its own kind of language between 2 women who had worked in the same room for 9 years. When Marcus Webb was walked out the front door of the pharmacy in handcuffs, Patrice watched him cross the sidewalk to the cruiser with the stillness of someone who is making sure to remember exactly what this looks like. "Lord," she said quietly. Dana said nothing. She watched Marcus get into the cruiser. She watched the door close. A man named Gerald Fitch, who owned the hardware store next door and had been standing on the sidewalk since 7:45, said later that he had counted the motorcycles when they arrived and counted them when they left, and both times reached the same number. He said the men had stood on the sidewalk for the entire duration, through the arrival of the cruisers, through the forensics team, through the walkout of all 3 suspects, without speaking to the police and without being spoken to, and that when it was over, they had gotten on their motorcycles and left the same way they had arrived, without hurry, without ceremony, heading south on Maple Street until the sound of the engines faded and the street was ordinary again. He said the old man had come out last. He had come out the front door of the pharmacy and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, and Hutchins had walked over to him, and they had spoken briefly. Gerald couldn't hear what was said, and Hutchins had written something in his notebook, and the old man had nodded once, and that was the entirety of it. No statement given at length, no name offered beyond what was necessary. Hutchins had not pushed for more, which Gerald thought was either professional judgment or the specific social intelligence of a man who understands when a conversation has reached its natural end. The old man had gotten on his motorcycle last. He had not looked back at the pharmacy. He had ridden south. Gerald Fitch said he had watched until the motorcycle was out of sight, which took longer than he expected, because Maple Street runs straight for a long way before it curves, and the old man rode at a pace that was neither fast nor slow, just steady, the pace of someone who knows exactly where he is going and sees no reason to arrive before he's ready. 6 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon in August, a 22-year-old woman named Sophie Arden started her first shift at Rourke's Compounding Pharmacy. She was a pharmacy technician, recently certified, recently moved to Pikeville from Harlan. She had applied for the job because it was the only opening in town and because she needed the work, and because the woman who ran the pharmacy had a reputation for being fair and for not making her employees feel like the job was doing them a favor by existing. Dana had spent the first hour showing her the layout, the dispensing system, the controlled substance logbook, the DEA tracking requirements, the coffee machine and its particular quirks, the cabinet under the register where a brush was stored that Sophie did not ask about, and Dana did not explain. At the end of the hour, Dana had stopped at the dispensing counter. She had placed 3 fingers flat against the laminate surface. "I want to show you something," she said. Sophie had watched her tap, 1, 2, 3, even spacing, quiet enough that it wouldn't carry more than 10 feet in a room with ambient noise. "What is that?" Sophie said. "It's a signal," Dana said. 3 taps, even, not fast. She explained what it meant. She explained when to use it. She explained that the person who needed to hear it might not always be in the room, and that this was why you also needed to know the number for the sheriff's office by memory, and not just by contact, and why the alarm code needed to be something you could punch in under stress, and why you never opened alone if you could avoid it. Sophie had listened with the attention of someone receiving information they hope never to use and intend never to forget. Who taught you that? Sophie said. Dana was quiet for a moment. She thought about a Tuesday morning 8 months before a Monday that had changed the particular shape of what ordinary meant to her. She thought about a man setting a prescription bag on a counter and turning it in his hands and asking, with the economy of someone who did not explain himself unless necessary, if he could show her something. She thought about a chair by the window, an unread newspaper on the floor beside it, a leather vest going out through a door without looking back. Someone who came in on Mondays, Dana said. Sophie waited to see if there was more. There wasn't. Dana straightened up from the counter. Again, she said. Your turn. Sophie placed 3 fingers on the laminate surface. She tapped once, twice, 3 times. A little fast the first time, self-conscious, the way you are when you're learning something whose weight you haven't yet earned. Slower, Dana said. Even, like you mean it. Sophie tapped again. This time it was right. Dana nodded. Outside on Maple Street, a Monday morning's worth of light was coming through the front window the way it always did, falling across the floor in a long, pale rectangle, reaching almost to the chair in the far left corner, the empty chair by the window where a man used to sit with a newspaper and exact change and a prescription for blood pressure medication, and almost nothing else that anyone in Pikeville had ever thought to ask about. The chair was still there. Dana had not moved it. Marcus Webb was charged with 3 counts of armed robbery, 2 counts of unlawful restraint, and 1 count of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. The investigation that followed connected him to 9 of the 11 pharmacies he had hit across 4 states. The other 2 came later, through evidence his own system had left behind without his knowing. A fuel receipt, a motel registration, the specific tread pattern of a green Dodge pickup, caught on a traffic camera in Harlan County 3 weeks before Pikeville. He was sentenced to 22 years. At the sentencing hearing, the judge asked if he had anything to say. Marcus Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I had a system. I thought it was airtight. He did not say anything else. The judge moved on. There is something worth sitting with in that sentence. Not the arrogance of it, though the arrogance is there, compressed into 7 words the way certain things compress under pressure. What is worth sitting with is the assumption underneath it. The belief that a system built on not seeing people could hold. That you could walk into a room, assess the variables, reduce the human beings in it to functions, the pharmacist, the safe, the exit, and remain in control of something you had fundamentally misread from the beginning. Marcus Webb had a system. Frank Briggs had something older than a system. He had 40 years of understanding what a room contains that a plan cannot account for. He had the particular knowledge of a man who has spent decades in spaces where reading what is actually present, not what you expect to be present, not what your plan requires to be present, but what is actually, physically, undeniably there, is the difference between walking out and not walking out. He had learned to see what people miss when they are focused on what they came for. And he had, on a Tuesday morning 8 months before it mattered, taken 20 minutes out of a prescription pickup to make sure that a 38-year-old woman who opened a pharmacy alone on Monday mornings knew 3 taps on a counter surface and what they meant and why they existed. He had not done it because he knew something was coming. He had done it because he understood something about the world that does not require a specific threat to be true. That the people who are most exposed are often the ones least likely to be seen as needing protection, and that the smallest piece of knowledge, carried quietly and practiced against the possibility of a day you hope never arrives, can be the exact thing that changes everything when it does. Dana Rourke had tapped 3 fingers on a laminate counter in a moment when she had no voice, and no options, and no certainty that anyone would hear her. Someone heard her. That is the whole story. Everything else is just the shape it took. If you or someone you know is being threatened or is in danger, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The number is 1-800-799-7233, free, confidential, available by call or text. You do not need to be certain. You only need to make the call. I want to ask you something before you go. Think about the people around you, not the ones you worry about, the ones you have stopped worrying about because they seem fine, because they open their own doors and carry their own bags, and never ask for anything, because they are competent and steady, and you have never once seen their hands shake. Think about what it would take for them to send a signal you would actually hear. Think about whether you would hear it. That is the question this story leaves me with every time I come back to it. Not the guns, not the plan, not the man in the chair who turned out to be the wrong person to underestimate. The question underneath all of it, are you paying attention to the right things, in the right rooms, with enough of yourself actually present to catch something quiet before it has to get loud? Frank Briggs was paying attention. Dana Rourke had learned to send the signal. Sophie Arden now knows what 3 taps on a counter means. The chain continues. This is Heart Tales. If this story reached you, if any part of it stayed, share it with one person today. Not for the numbers. Because somewhere out there, someone is in a room right now, and the person who could help them is sitting 2 tables away, and the only thing missing is the knowledge that there is a signal and what it sounds like. 2 more stories are waiting for you on screen right now. Stay close.